I've said this before, but I've only been in monogamous relationships. Like, that's, for me, that's my thing. I've never cheated on anyone. And yet I was also an escort, and I never bridged those two worlds. And I know where my values lie, and I my boundaries are very stern. That's the other misconception about sex work. It's like, oh, well, they must have no boundaries. We have the most insane boundaries.
So what would you say, one critique that I get from one of my co-hosts of another show when he talks about this, it's once you put a dollar sign on it, then you've kind of devalued yourself, and you're now saying, like, I'm only worth X, versus a woman or a man that doesn't put a dollar sign on it, and then it's only within a container of, like, a monogamous relationship. I don't agree with that, obviously. But his take is you're almost devaluing it by putting a dollar sign on that exchange.
Of sex or of art?
So I guess it goes back to the question too of what is art, because you do, right? There are pieces of art that you would say are, what would you say? What's the word?
Priceless.
Priceless, exactly. And then you can go buy something for $100, right? So there's a delineation.
And hey, I was a musician. I wrote some shitty songs and I wrote some phenomenal songs. None of them you'll ever have heard of. But it's like, it's also nuanced, right? So sex with a partner, with a monogamous partner, sex with love is very different. Making love is very different. Like, sex is a whole language in and of itself. It does different things for us at different times, right? Like, I am someone that it alleviates, orgasm alleviates anxiety for me. When I'm stressed, that helps me. Most women are not like that. If they're feeling stressed out, then they can't even think sexually at all.
To just cut in there, and I do apologize, Coral. It's my good Canadian in me, right? I think
sorry.
To the core of it, we know instinctually the power of sex. We know how mighty it is within us as an urge, as a part of our identity. Even if you are an asexual person and you're not interested in sexual interaction of a physical kind, that's your sexuality.
Still defining.
So knowing how profound a relationship we can have by exploring our sexuality and wanting to know it, sex work allows people to venture into that without the potential of, say, rejection, without the potential of being criticized too heavily by a sex partner. So that's a big value in sex work and the art of sex itself, and the value in experiencing it is like, maybe I'm just getting really excited here and cloudy by it, but the idea that if we can avoid some of those barriers that happen in human to human, outside of sex work attempts at connection, then why not seize it? If it means that you get to explore your sexuality, why not do that with a sex worker?
Yeah. So you're talking from a client standpoint, because it's obviously different from a sex worker lens, because performative sex can be very insidious. It led me to certainly like an intimacy impasse where you're getting paid for being validated, and then intersecting with a real life relationship, you're like, wait, what the hell? The goalposts just moved. Like, where do I stand here? And I call that like provider privilege, right? You're like, what? Like, you have this kind of entitlement and you have to switch gears, and it's very humbling. So it's liberating in so many ways. And again, insidious in more subtle ways, not the ones we hear about, because we hear about trafficking, which is not the same as consensual sex work.
That's why I'm saying put a price tag on it. That's why I'm saying charge for that, and there should be a number on it.
Yeah.
It is art, and it is beautiful, and it is human, and it is worth something.
Yeah.
So to the people that think that having this more normalized or less stigmatized or more readily available or accessible, that's actually hindering them having a more deep connection with someone that they don't have to, right? Like, because now I don't have to work for it, and now this is the safer way for me to experience it without criticism. So I'm gonna just do this all of the time instead of being vulnerable and risking, right, being denied or whatever that is with
there's a balance.
Civilian.
There's a balance that's required, and there's an awareness. I think that's the responsibility. Some people just lose themselves in it, right? A client can lose themselves.
That's the pathological. What I ever came across, a lot of it, they were looking for answers, or a lot of them were in, long-term partnerships or marriages and sexless partnerships and marriages. They tried to broach the subject with their partner and were recurrently shut down on an ongoing basis. So what's going to happen if that happens? And so, you know, so much of sex work was actually very little to do, again, with the act itself, and more about the intimacy of like being seen, heard, understood. And if something's already baseline transactional, if you're just showing up and it's just baseline transactional and sexual exchange, then anything on top of that that's offered in the space is going to be pretty radical intimacy and honesty.